Welcome back. In this video, we will continue our discussion on adaptation actions, but with a special focus on prioritization and appraisal. Balancing needs is not easy. When decision makers build adaptation plans, they face the difficult choice of appraising and deciding which adaptation investment projects and policies to adopt. This process becomes even more complex with the uncertainty brought by climate change. Prioritization of adaptation options is important because of the limited resources for implementation in terms of time, financial means, and institutional capacities, as well as the limited knowledge on the scope of investments. Let's hear more on this from UNDP's Head of Climate Change Adaptation, Pradeep Kurukula Surya.
Adaptation will entail choices to be made. Every problem, as we all know, has multiple solutions. So that's one issue. The second issue is that adaptation will necessarily involve having to deal with resource constraints. So there's a scarcity issue that also has to be dealt with. So ensuring that we have a full understanding of both the costs and benefits of adapting and the options that it entails will certainly help us to make much more informed planning decisions of where to invest, what to invest in, and when investment should take place in order to avoid the kinds of damages that we are expected to see and certainly want to avoid.
So, the evaluation of climate change adaptation options requires that we estimate the benefits and costs. CostBenefit Analysis, or CBA, is a tool to assess and compare the impacts of projects and policies, even when costs and benefits occur over long time horizons. It analyzes everything in monetary terms, something everyone can relate to. You can read up on CBA in more detail and know how it is calculated in the lecture notes for this week. Now, prioritization is about decision making. If we return to our map of the LEG technical guidelines, we find that any decision-making process must be participatory. It is important to engage stakeholders in the development of your NAP project, especially during the early stages. This helps choosing initiatives that are more responsive to local needs. Rohini, UNDP's lead technical specialist on NAPs, has something more to say on the importance of context and micro-level information.
So for adaptation, prioritization and implementation, they would need to go down very much to the project or initiative level, which means that there's a lot of information that is required which is contextual, which could be from a province or a community. So there is a lot of data element to it, but there's also a lot of information that is required from communities which needs to be processed, and so that it can inform the prioritization of the adaptation initiatives. And these adaptation initiatives will need to eventually be converted into projects which will have to then attract investment on the ground.
So, say for example, you have successfully arrived at a set of adaptation initiatives. And as Rohini said, you will now be converting these into projects. But how would you do this? The project should be designed in line with agreed adaptation goals. The design stage includes identification of activities, entry points in planning processes, budgeting, and again, engaging stakeholders. We can engage stakeholders through focus groups of women, men, youth, the private sector, NGOs, and civil society. An example from UNDP and Zambia would be relevant here. While developing a Green Climate Fund proposal in Zambia, UNDP carried out comprehensive consultations with farmers. These consultations were on issues ranging from seed varieties to value chains and market development. It has helped in understanding not only the practices and needs of farmers, but also needs of stakeholders involved across the value chains, from storage to processing and marketing. Finally, the project should be designed in line with the proposal requirements put forward by donors. Let's hear more on this from Janie Rue from the GCF.
Let me explain how the Green Climate Fund works as a funding mechanism for adaptation action. The Green Climate Fund is the largest dedicated fund for climate change. Half of its resources are to be allocated for adaptation. One other important feature of the GCF is the investment criteria. One of them is the impact potential for adaptation. And this really means that we look at if the project is ambitious and reaching the fund objective and well targeting the results area for adaptation.
Remember that certain donors also require that specific background studies be carried out. These range from feasibility studies of the proposed interventions and gender appraisals to assessments of environmental and social safeguards. Environmental and social safeguards are a combined set of rules and institutions that help projects minimize adverse environmental and social impacts. Check out the lecture notes for more background on how to apply these to your adaptation project. We covered a lot in this week. Identifying and prioritizing adaptation actions in agricultural sectors is a complex task. It is important to look at the costs, benefits, and trade-offs between different options before deciding which ones to implement, as resources are scarce and some needs more urgent than others. Cost-benefit analysis is one of the most important tools to do that. Stakeholders should be consulted from the outset of the project design. It is also important that your project fulfills the proposal requirement of donors. Speaking of donors, next week we will explore options for financing adaptation, from accessing international climate finance to investing in smallholder farmers. More on that next week.